German Daily History with me, Nicholas Richardson. In the previous episode, we discussed the life of Józef Cyrankiewicz, who served as Prime Minister in Communist Poland between 1947 and 1952, and again for 16 years between 1954 and 1970. In this episode, we will start to discuss how Cyrankiewicz did not help the Polish resistance fighter Witold Pilecki, his co-prisoner from Auschwitz, when the communist authorities sentenced him to death. We will also discuss some general characteristics of the communist system.
So in the last few years, he was in this role and died, as we mentioned in an earlier episode, just on the cusp of democracy making its first few months in Poland. The first free elections in Poland were semi-free in 1989, and the first completely free elections took place almost a year and a half later. So it was some kind of period where things were in flux, but things were going the democratic way.
The writing was on the wall.
It definitely was.
Yes, and this is and of all the episodes, I think the one that I just do find remarkable, even by the standards of the day, was having both of them survived Auschwitz. The fact that when Pilecki was on this trial, which we should point out was a completely trumped up by the communist regime at the time and bore no relation to the fact that he'd done anything wrong, other than, in their eyes, fighting the Warsaw Uprising, of course, which was always considered a bit dodgy by the communists, surprisingly. You know, again, not only did the communists have the wrong sort of people, they always seem to have the wrong sort of enemy. You know, fighting for the enemy is not quite, if it's not our concept of what the enemy is, or how you should fight against that particular enemy, then you're equally guilty.
Also, Pilecki was one of the men who he made a trip to Western Europe, where he united with the Polish army in the West, spent some time over there, started writing his famous report from Auschwitz in the West, and then returned to Poland. And another communist tradition is that anyone who has been to the West is deemed suspicious once they return, whether it was Red Army POWs that spent a few years in Nazi POW camps in Germany.
Yes, because from their point of view, being caught was probably a sin as well. If you're a communist, being caught by the enemy, you should sort of fight to the death.
Yes, that is one thing. The second is that they suspected that they had somehow soaked in Western ideals and thoughts, and who knows with which intelligence service they might have been in contact with. So anybody returning to the Soviet bloc from the West was always...
I mean, we saw this character in absurd length in the 1930s when various people from Ukraine were sent to the gulags. And then when they returned from the gulags, the fact they'd survived the gulags was somehow suspicious.
Yes.
And this itself was probably a suspicious act. Or if you died of starvation, which of course millions did at the time, tragic. But dying of starvation was itself a critical act because you were implying that the authorities did not give you enough food.
Yes.
The warped mentality of Stalin and his entourage is actually quite extraordinary.
Definitely a case for psychologists for decades and if not centuries to come.
I wonder, are they still slicing Lenin's brain every year, which the Moscow Institute of Sciences used to do that?
Well, I guess there is something to study. And as you say, this communist ideology, what is also remarkable is how unison it is, because this warped mentality, it reappeared, whether it was in the Great Leap in China, whether it was with the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, wherever you have this ideology, very similar, violent and pathological events take place.
And it is extraordinary, and yet what even so we're digressing, but it's history, so that's all right. What is even more remarkable for me is how in the West, in Europe, the intellectuals always give the communists an easy ride. Oh, well, the problem was there wasn't quite enough socialism.
It wasn't real communism.
It wasn't real communism. You had these deluded people like George Bernard Shaw, for example, go to, and the Webbs would go to the Soviet Union and say, we've seen the future and it works, because it obviously didn't work at all.
The so-called useful idiots.
Useful idiots, yes. I mean, extraordinary and really remarkable that otherwise intelligent people could fail to see the evidence before their eyes.
Yeah,
But there we are. Some topics there, I think, for future programmes.
absolutely.
But Adam, thank you very much for sharing
Thank
that
you.
with us. It's been fascinating. And there we have it, another fascinating character from Polish history who saw the Soviet Union, well, more particularly Soviet communism, as the way forward, both for himself and for Poland. Well, it was certainly the way forward for his career. But that doesn't mean it was a good choice when you look at history in a wider context. Anyway, there's a lot there we can look at in future programmes. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as we have. Thank you for watching, and do join us again next time on Poland Daily History.